We are now syndicated in New Orleans on WHIV 102.3 FM, in addition to KOOP in Austin 91.7 FM, where we will broadcast from 8 to 9 a.m. in New Orleans. Our second half hour will be dedicated to a deeper analysis of political theory and history. So this week we are celebrating the 200th birthday of Karl Marx, one of the most influential political philosophers and the founder of scientific socialist thought. Beyond inspiring the socialist revolutions that have transformed societies across the globe, Marx made major breakthroughs in economic thought, including the theorization of the origin of commodity production and the labor theory of value. To study the living legacy of Marx today, we are joined from Beijing by Ian Goodrum, an editor with China Daily and a member of the Communist Party USA. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thanks. Glad to be here. I don't currently sound like I'm in a NASA wind tunnel, right?
No, you sound fine.
Fantastic.
So tell me a bit. You just went to what looks like an absolutely fantastic museum on the museum exhibit, in particular on the legacy of Marx there in Beijing. Can you tell me a little bit about what some of the insights you gleaned from that are, and just generally the legacy of Marx as you see it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, this weekend has been big for Marx in Beijing, in particular, of course, across the world. You see the pictures of his gravesite in London or in Trier, Germany, where a statue was just erected, provided by China and designed by a Chinese artist, coincidentally. This trip to the museum is actually something of a consolation prize for me. I was planning on going to this academic conference at Peking University, the World Congress on Marxism. It's a recent edition by the university. Due to some registration snafu, I wasn't able to make it. But the fact that I've got that kind of a choice here, it kind of tells you something. I could go to this preeminent academic conference, or I can go to this just open today exhibit. There's a lot to do, and the reason for that is because Marx is such a profound thinker, and has had such a huge impact all across the world. You know, of course he's a German, but and his ideas took hold first in his home country, but over the decades, as it's spread, it's gone to all corners of the earth. And the fact that I'm here, an American in China, I've come from a place with a great deal of socialist organizing, and I've come to a place with obviously a great deal of socialist organizing. So. And all that stems from Marxism, his theories. And so being able to kind of walk into this exhibit and see all these, there's artwork from all different countries. There's some that was produced in China. There's some that was produced in the Soviet Union. There are manuscripts and first editions of the most impactful works that Marx wrote. There's first editions of the Communist Manifesto, the first American English and British English editions, and there's a lot of striking images too. I posted some pictures online, but it doesn't really do justice because there's a few not so much interactive. There is an interactive portion, but there's one in particular. There's a wall of editions of the Communist Manifesto in dozens of different languages from all across the world, and I stayed there for a good 20 or so minutes because I was trying to find a repeated edition, like the same edition. Now, some editions were in different languages, but there was, as far as I could tell, no repetition. The fact, this is a document that's been printed and reprinted so many times in so many different languages, and sent to so many different places. It's just all in front of you on this great big wall. It really tells you, in a nutshell, the kind of impact that his thought has had. This one pamphlet, really, not a particularly long document. Not that Marx was known for his brevity, but the fact that this political pamphlet has had such an impact everywhere. You can go to almost any country in the world, in all the continents. I wouldn't be surprised if Antarctica didn't get on the bandwagon too, that there's a communist party there. in nearly every country, or if not calling itself directly the Communist Party of country name, there will be a party that is working to liberate the working class in directly taking as inspiration Marx and Marxism, whether that's one line of thinking or interpretation of Marxism or another. It's impossible to deny the impact. I think there was a BBC poll in 1999 that named him the greatest thinker of the millennium, and that's, if anything, an understatement. So, it was really something.
Yeah, I mean, it's really inspiring to see the kind of resurgence in kind of acceptance of the real contributions of Marx after so long here, kind of in the imperial core. I'm curious as to what the thoughts of kind of the average Chinese people you've spoken to, what the kind of thoughts on the street as to either Marx or generally the Marxist thought is in general. If people really feel connected to that legacy in China today, or if that's something that's currently kind of being struggled with.
I think they do, and obviously my experiences aren't universal. I've mostly kept to one specific part of China, but the conversations I've had, yes, people have been interested in what I have to say as an American communist, and we've talked about Marx and exploitation and these things, and overwhelmingly, I mean, there's a wide range of opinion. Not everybody. There's this tendency in the West to kind of characterize people in Asian countries as a monolith, and there's obvious underpinnings from colonialism and imperialism and these kinds of reductive ways of thinking that were used to justify wanton slaughter and devastation to these countries in the past. But it's hard. This is something that I was obviously never sympathetic to, but especially when you're there and you're talking to people and you realize, these people, Marxism has been part of their education system since birth. As a result, you have a wide range of interpretation and thought. There is a dominant strain in terms of what the party espouses, but there's, in academic circles, in any circle of life, you will see a vastly different set of opinions from one person to the next, and the fact that Marxism is this kind of fundamental educational subject means that almost everybody will have an opinion because they were all taught it. It's like, you talk to somebody in the U.S. about U.S. history, and you will get a very wide range of opinions because most people had this baseline because there was a public education system then that taught us these things, whether they were taught depending on what state they were in can change what they were taught, but it's roughly the same thing when it comes to Marx. There hasn't been anybody who I've talked to specifically about it who has said, "Oh, I don't know anything about that." Everybody feels some way about it, and they volunteer their opinion without much prodding or difficulty.
Yeah, that's that's an interesting sort of baseline to have. That Marxist thought and the kind of history starting with Marx would be the baseline in China. And I also kind of want to remark very briefly that since you just kind of mentioned that that people kind of often volunteer their opinion. One of the kind of Western, racist myths about China is that people in China are always either too scared to speak up or, again, as you said, kind of have monolithic opinions on things. So that the fact that, I shouldn't even really need to say that, but just the fact that there is that kind of wide range of opinion with kind of a baseline.
People that are nominally sympathetic to leftist positions can still have that opinion. I mean, it's not unique to reactionaries for sure. I think people do carry that on a certain level that kind of thinking inside them, and it's obviously not true, and it never was. But you use more accurate words. I was trying to be a little bit more polite, but yeah, it's racist, 100%. And the fear, the supposed fear that people have to volunteer their quote unquote true opinions about something. No, the people I've interacted with, the Chinese people I've interacted with, and the expats, but that's another story. They're happy to tell you what they think about anything. Like, if anything, people are more outspoken here about the things they believe and the things they want to see in their country, and it's absolutely a breath of fresh air. Because if any, okay, so if there's a monolithic way of thinking anywhere in the world, it's happening in the West. It's happening with white Westerners. Being one, and having had conversations with many of them, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard the same repetitive talking points from people who claim to have all kinds of political viewpoints. But for the supposed monolith here, it's people want to talk. They want to share how they feel. They want to discuss these things. It's not, there's no fear. There's nothing like that. It's I don't know how many times I can say it, but it's not something I've experienced at all.
I also, for those of you who just may be tuning in, we're kind of discussing the legacy of Marx and understanding China to be kind of a living, that kind of living legacy in many ways. And I think as we were just talking about, that vitalized political conversation, that political debate happening within China is kind of tribute to when people really feel engaged with a political process, which is not something people have here at all. There's no real on the ground grassroots engagement with political processes. Yeah. I'd like to go into a little bit of a Chinese history and correct some of the really get into some of the misunderstandings of what Marxism has brought to China, and what Marxism has generally brought to so many countries. One of the common misconceptions about Marxism and about specifically kind of the Marxist-Leninist tradition of socialist revolutions is this idea that they brought quote unquote brought poverty or brought quote unquote totalitarianism or whatnot. But you look at, for instance, the history of China. China before Marxism endured what was called I believe it's called locally the Century of Humiliation, where they were absolutely dominated and genocides were committed by foreign powers, kind of over and over again repeatedly and all of this was all of this was for access to land, labor, and mineral rights. The kind of Marxist path that China has been on, and again, there's been such a struggle within that country with factions of socialism, factions of capitalism, kind of vying for control of the country at various points. But generally, the history has of not only China but Russia has been such rapid economic development that's immediately put toward the improvement in the quality of life for common people, and then we're also seeing at this point it's put toward the improvement in the quality of the environment. We're seeing such rapid development of solar power in China that's unprecedented anywhere in the world.
No other country comes close.
Yeah. Is this kind of the feeling you've gotten, and is this what you've experienced in terms of how how China and especially the Chinese people you've interacted with in your 8 months in Beijing? Do you really feel that there's still that connection to the revolution?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the amount of time I've been here. I don't want to position myself as some kind of old hand expert. It's just been 8 months, but
yeah.
Well, I mean, speaking to the environment specifically, then I'll get to the broader question. It's incredible, really. I got here this past September, and I was told to expect the terrible smoggy winter that you see those pictures of, and you think the apocalypse is here and all that. That famous debunked photograph of the sunrise in Tiananmen, Um, that was just an advertisement, but people passed it around on the internet saying that because the Chinese people can't see the sun, they have to put it up on the screen. Well,
Unbelievable. So much stuff that
yeah,
passes for,
yeah.
just pass for truth, because,
Well, you'd think it would be unbelievable, but quite a few people believe it.
Critical when it comes to Western white people, critical or critical thinking just does not apply to any stories coming out of either China or the DPRK or whatnot. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about, and we can that's the subject of an entirely different episode, really. But my time here, I brought a box full of masks. I was ready to go. I thought to myself, well, okay, it's going to be bad, but you do what you can. And there have been a couple of not great days. I think there was one really bad day where AQI got up to 500, which for somebody who's not familiar with how AQI works, that's real bad. But it's happened only one time this winter, and people, I work with people, foreigners and Chinese alike, who have been here for a very long time at China Daily and in Beijing, and they tell me, yeah, this is the best year we've ever had, the best winter we've ever had for smog. And I think I've gone out with a mask. Maybe I usually, my rule is if AQI hits 300 or above, I go out with a mask. And I've really, I can count the amount of times I've done that on one hand. So, I mean, obviously the goal is to be in a place where you don't have to wear a mask at all or ever consider that sort of thing. But considering the winters of past years and how bad things had gotten before, this is a complete sea change. I mean, the numbers bear it out. The government reported, I think, a 30% reduction of some in terms of particulates in the air, and I forget the percentage increase, but a big increase in the number of days with AQI below 100 or 200. And the vast majority of the time I was out here in the winter, it's cleared up totally now, but even in the worst winter months when people are using their apartment heating, which is the source of a lot of the pollution, it was almost always clear blue sky and maybe a little hazy at worst. So there's real improvement happening on the environmental front. So China's getting its own house in order, and it really does fall to the U.S. to pick up the baton, because they're taking care of business. They're making a very sincere effort in that front. As to the broader kind of commitment to the revolution, I will say that being in the city center and being around younger people, you do get kind of a sense that there's not as much of a link directly to kind of the revolutionary years. People have the political conversations I've had about, that I told you about, they tend to take place with people that are not old, but they're a little older than I am. I'm 28. The people my age, and I think this is because it's been long enough that and especially in a big city like Beijing, where things have been pretty good for a while. If you go out to the rural areas and you talk to people, that's where the party has its support. That's where people, when you talk about being firmly committed to the revolution, that's where you have the real diehards, because China is changing so much and developing so much that the kinds of changes that are being seen in the rural areas are a lot bigger in terms of quality of life than what you get in the cities. So incomes are going up everywhere, but the cities have had running water, electricity, like the basic necessities, for a very long time. Out in the rural areas, you've got villages and people that are maybe for the first time not having to get their water from a well. People that are getting electricity, indoor plumbing, like these, because for all the egalitarianism of the post 49, pre 76 years of China, it was still a very poor country and still a very agrarian based rural country. And so these changes are still happening outside the major cities, and the people that are experiencing them directly are definitely still people who put up portraits, put up mob portraits in their homes, and and do feel very strongly about. Now, I'm not saying that the people in the cities don't have commitment to the country. People are committed to the country in a different way in the cities. They are, they look around and they do see improvements in their daily lives. 5 years ago, the technology for smartphones, for example, is nowhere near what it is now. You've got these Chinese companies that are innovating constantly and building new apps and new technology. So that does affect how people live their lives. But it's easier to abstract that kind of change outside of politics than it is for something like the government has built these new villages for us to move into and live a better life. Like, that's political, right? That's more easily observably political, and it making that connection is hard. And that's the challenge I think the party faces in the coming years is kind of building up that spirit again, and getting people involved and really back into that idea of commitment to, as you said, the revolution and these ideals. And I think that's a big part of why, I mean, the Communist Party is committed to Marxism because it's a communist party, and for all the claims people make about it without having actually investigated, for lack of a better word, the facts, it's committed to Marxism for a number of reasons, but also because this is a kind of a unifying theory that can galvanize people and get them fired up about a country whose revolution happened so many decades ago. So it's not. I don't envy the party at all for having that kind of a governance challenge. You have to balance a lot of very different interests in a huge landmass with a very diverse population. It's not easy. It's 1.5 billion people almost. You have to manage these interests, and so I think there is definitely a difference in terms of one area versus another in my admittedly limited experience so far. But I don't think that maybe a little bit maybe a different kind of commitment exists in the cities that's not kind of explicitly political the way it might be in the rural areas. And I think that's a big part of why the party has stayed the course, so to speak, and really kept things on this track, because they realize that the youth lead the way. The youth they're very, just like everybody else, they're strongly opinionated, and so keeping it real and keeping it like something that's in the world they can see and not abstracted, I think is a big part of keeping the spirit alive. So.
Yeah, that
answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really sort of interesting insight that so much is kind of happening within rural areas, because I mean, so much of that difference in political consciousness exists between urban and rural. We see similar sort of things where going back to kind of Marxist theory, and again, this is where Marxist theory has kind of evolved in over the years, is that Marx himself kind of theorized, of course, that the proletariat within the urban areas would be the most advanced, who would lead the revolution. Experience has shown that consciousness tends to evolve in kind of different ways. Generally, the urban cores tend to have the best class consciousness because being kind of centered in, being centered with so many other workers, and having to not have access to land often, not being able to own any land or having any access to capital whatsoever, tends to make people more advanced in their understanding of the way oppression works. But right. Yet it sounds like the situation in China is because so many of those rural areas are now or continue to be so underdeveloped that they can see more of the immediate benefit of having that socialist state to kind of help improve their own quality of life.
I mean, we are talking about someone who is a theorist, but we are also talking about someone who was an activist and a revolutionary in his own right, because he, like good Marxists, realized that the famous quote, of course, the philosophers have interpreted the world. The point is to change it. You have to, and Mao, in his On Practice, essentially said a similar thing, more detailed because it was a much longer work. But yeah, theory can only stay vibrant and effective if it's being matched with real world experience and real world observations. And so, I mean, that's why we say scientific socialism. So, and this comes back to, slogans are one thing, imagery is one thing, but the real world changes that you're seeing are what confirm your belief in a system and in a political ideology. And so, in a country like China, where the government is on this huge sweeping anti-poverty campaign, which involves massive infrastructure projects to bring transportation infrastructure, to build new housing, to upgrade dilapidated housing, to do all these things that are objectively improving the lot of the average person. That is what keeps people's faith, for lack of a better term. And kind of, so essentially this policy is putting the money where the mouth is. If yesterday's speech by Xi Jinping was the rhetoric, the rhetorical, symbolic association with Marx, the anti-poverty campaign and the way the society and the government actually functions is the practice, is the application of that theory to real world experiences and real world circumstances. And that's what keeps people's belief. And that's, and the fact that it has continued in this way, despite various periods of difficulty, I think shows that China is not only committed to Marxism theoretically, but in practice, and its ability to change the theory based on practice as well. So you get, the snide commenters who say, well, you put up a portrait of Marx in your legislative building. Well, that's not really being socialist. And no, it's not. But that's not all there is to it. And I would be a fool to think that was all there was to it. So yeah, and in the urban areas too, despite what I said about there being maybe a less pronounced a kind of less pronounced connection to the past, similar programs are happening in urban areas because there's development needing to happen all around. The principal contradiction, as Mao would put it, and as Xi put it in his political report, has changed. Previously, the contradiction was between people's desire for a better life and backward productive forces. Well, now the productive forces have been developed. Principal contradiction has changed to that of unequal development, unbalanced development, as he puts it, and the people's desire for a better life. So essentially coming out and saying that development still needs to continue, but it has happened on an asymmetrical basis, and the party's new course and the government's new course is to correct that. So, I mean, there's a ton of things. We can't get into all the details, but there's a lot of reasons why I believe China is still committed to this revolutionary mission, is still committed to the betterment of its people and its society, and to the ultimate realization of as is referred to in one of the big goals, the modern socialist country. The distinction is, right now, China is operating in a system that is socialist, but it's not a fully modernized system. It's not a fully developed system, and so from now until 2049, which is the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the PRC, this is still very much, as the party calls it, the primary stage of socialism, where there are going to be aspects that are not yet fully developed. And between now and then, the government and the people still have to figure out what the right course is and what the right method is. And it's a learning process. It's an ongoing process. And that's also what Marxism is too. Again, going back to the scientific aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think people often don't really understand what the socialist project is when they say that, China is not socialist, because, yes, of course, there is a Chinese bourgeois faction. There is a faction of kind of a Chinese capitalist ruling class that maintains, of course, some level of power within the country. But
well, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, because there is a bourgeoisie, but it's not a ruling class as you would think about it.
Oh yeah. Thank you for correcting me on that, because I guess there tends to really only be, they are not the class in power right now within China. They're a class that continues to vie for power, continues to struggle for power, but they are not the class that maintains that control.
Yeah.
But when we think of what we understand a socialist state to be, the state, and this, I want to get into a little bit more of the kind of general Marxist theory here. The Marxist theory of the state, which has pretty much been proven to be the correct to the degree that political theory is really kind of proven. The Marxist theory of the state really kind of situates the state as a force for managing the contradictions of there being two or more classes. It is sort of the mediating force that allows a ruling class to stay in power. That's the capitalist state. The socialist state has a much different function, in that the socialist state exists to consolidate existing classes. It exists to essentially ensure that those contradictions that have led to the accumulation of wealth by one class over another class, that those are eliminated. That those means for the kind of separation of classes are eliminated. So therefore, a socialist state is necessary so long as there are multiple classes. It can be right or it can be wrong in its approach, but generally that is the idea that is worked toward, is the elimination of classes. Understanding that the state is always a work in progress. It is not ever at a point of perfection. Because at the point of perfection, as Lenin said, that would be the point at which it withers away. So it's a work in progress, and the state does function as a kind of mediator, but the question is, mediator on behalf of whom? Like what class holds ultimate power, political power, state power over the other class? And I think that if you really look, and if you take a deep dive and you take time to research, you will see a number of interlocking systems that still exist to place primary power in the hands of the working class, the proletariat, because the primary political mechanism, political organ in China is the CPC, the Communist Party. There are a number of what are called democratic parties that consult and deliberate and propose to the CPC, but the CPC is the party in power. It does hold the majority of seats in most state bodies, and that's and what is the CPC? Well, if you want to know what the CPC is, a good way to find out is who is in the CPC. And I checked these numbers today, so they should be right. The most recent census by the CPC organization department states that approximately 89.9 or 90 million people are in the CPC as of last National Congress. And of that group, around 15 or 16 million are government officials, party officials, managers. So these are kind of what most people think of as the ruling class in what they would put quotes around the word socialist in this case. Firm managers, directors, party officials, government officials, these people that do, in the case of managers, hold a ridiculous degree of power in capitalist states, but when it comes to officials and party officials, are thought to hold an absurd amount of power in socialist states. So that's 15 or 16 million out of 89. Meanwhile, there's 7 that are classified as other. I think that's mostly military, or a good chunk is military. I'm not sure, but the I think, was it 63? Then it would be roughly are
industrial workers, technical workers, farmers, fishermen, herdsmen, students, retirees. And the biggest group out of all of those are farmers, fishermen, and herdsmen, making up about 30 million of the total. And it's also interesting if you do a deep dive into the backgrounds of high officials. Xi Jinping is a bit of an exception because he's what's known as a princeling. He was, I believe, his father was Xi Zhongqun, a prominent revolutionary, and so kind of the sons, and admittedly they are usually sons. Gender parity and equality is something everybody kind of realizes is a problem, and people talk about, and it's not like a scary topic. But he's kind of he's what people would consider party royalty, and he's in the top leadership position. But he's kind of a special case because most of the children of previous top leaders don't enter the leadership. They might be rank and file party members or in the military, but they don't. They're not in those high positions because they're kind of looked upon as, I don't know, like the beneficiaries of a dynasty, and that's not really something that people like here. Mao Zedong's grandson is in the military, but he didn't even attend the last National Congress, which is where party posts are decided by the big National Congress and the Central Committee. He's not on the Central Committee. Like it's not a dynastic transfer of power. And if you look into the backgrounds of high-ranking officials, they came from farming families. They came from working families. The parentage of most of the people that are on the Politburo, the Central Committee, the Standing Committee, which is the group of 7, that's kind of the top political decision-making body. There are a couple exceptions, but that usually has to do with people whose parents had a little bit more education. Xi is really the only heavy hitter in terms of that kind of background, and again, it kind of speaks to how much of a savvy politician he is, that he was able to make it there. There's really not that kind of, for example, the U.S. Conventional wisdom had it a couple of years ago that the 2016 presidential election would be between a Clinton and a Bush, and right. So talk about your dynasties. The people that are in power came from these modest beginnings, and you hear these rough and tumble hard hat stories of politicians in the U.S., but then you do any bit of investigating, you find out that's pretty much nonsense. But here, no, I mean, China was a poor country when these people were growing up, and so this is their background. This is what they've known, and this is the reality of it.
That's a. So, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I kind of lost. I had a something else, but it's not.
Oh, yeah.
It's not coming to me. So maybe.
That's sort of really interesting, and that's good to hear about the background there of the kind of Communist Party officials.
Oh, I remembered it. Sorry.
Yeah.
The other thing would be that in terms of how officials are selected, whether in party or state positions, they are separate entities. The way a career works in China, if you're aiming for a high government and you're aiming for a central government post or a spot in the Central Committee, you start at after university as an official in, let us say, not the most comfortable of circumstances. Younger officials are almost overwhelmingly in rural areas, in underdeveloped regions, in places where the job is extremely tough. And you're expected to perform, and you're expected to turn things around and help people make their lives better. And that's where you are. I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but that's the starting post, and that's often intermediate posts too, as you move up the ladder. The people that are in government now in China have been tested by fire in a lot of cases, and in a system where failure is not looked upon kindly. If you make a high profile mistake, you are drummed out. Like that is it. That is it for your political career. It's very high stakes, and the notion that even at the top levels of government, people are sipping champagne and clinking their glasses and laughing at all the foolish people who think they still believe in Marxism is just it's an absolute caricature. Whatever your personal motivations are, whether you truly want to help people or not, I think in most cases they do, or if not almost all. The system essentially forces you to do a good job in these difficult positions, and so you're either motivated by altruism, by your commitment to Marxism and socialism. You're committed, or if you're mercenary and more career minded, those are all reasons to do a good job and make things better for the people in your constituency. And this takes place. It might not be the most attractive picture for a government meeting to have a bunch of old guys, but you know what? It might not be ideal, but it means that they've gone decades without a mistake, a high profile mistake. It means they've done a good enough job to keep getting promoted up the ladder. So by the time you reach central government or central positions, you are, for one reason or another, you are committed to this ongoing project. So for me, this is just one aspect of the system, but for me, that's one that kind of tells me a lot.
Yeah, it really kind of sounds like China might be, I don't know, some kind of meritocracy where people who are actually qualified do a good job may actually rise to the top of state leadership. How about
you would be forgiven? You will be forgiven for thinking something so outlandish.
We're going to go ahead and wrap up. Any sort of last thoughts on kind of the direction Xi Jinping has taken, or generally, thoughts about the kind of the role of either the Chinese state or the Chinese Communist Party in the lives of the people? As we, again, for those who are just tuning in, we are talking about kind of the 200th birthday of Marx, and we're kind of talking about China as sort of the living legacy of Marx today. Again, of course, a work in progress, but nonetheless, a real tribute to the kind of emancipatory, liberatory power of Marx. Any sort of last thoughts on, either especially the direction Xi Jinping has been taking, or generally about the role of the state or the Communist Party in the lives of people in China?
I mean, I do think that this is a topic that we could dedicate a lot of time to. But I might speak specifically to Xi. It's been very heartening, not just in the images and symbols that have been put out, most notably yesterday when she gave a speech about Marx and his legacy in advance of the 200th birthday. But that's kind of the thing too, right? I was hoping that to go to this World Congress on Marxism and kind of balance the symbolism with the hard-nosed scholarly reality of Marxism as it exists today in China, but couldn't go. So instead, I'll talk about the future. She's certainly been ambitious in his administration so far. Not just in the goals that have been set, which are very lofty goals. These are, that's kind of the way the party and the government work. The party sets out these broad goals. The government then mobilizes plans and its resources to meet those goals. So I wasn't able to go to the National Congress of the Communist Party, but I was able to go to the NPC, the legislative session. And that's where the premier, which is one of the top state officials as opposed to the party officials, Li Keqiang, he's in the party standing committee, but he's also the premier. He lays out the report of the government, basically government done and what it's done. So Xi at the National Congress came out with these big goals. The idea being that by the centenary of the Communist Party was founded in 1921. So in 2021, the idea is to basically double the per capita GDP of everybody in China. That's the monetary value for it, but generally, like wages have tripled in the past few years, so that's part of the goal. But also to have eradicated extreme poverty in the country. And the poverty rate was, at last checking in the rural areas, hovering around 3.5, 4.5%, which I should note the U.S. poverty rate is currently at 11%. So that's a goal that's well on its way to being accomplished. The other one is, of course, building a fully modernized socialist country by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And that's a less specific goal right now because it's so far off. But what I foresee happening is, because of the changing of the principal contradiction that she laid out at the National Congress, the focus is now going to be on income inequality, finally guaranteeing these basic services for everyone in such a way that people are because not to knock the Iron Rice Bowl, which was the kind of social welfare system of the post 49 pre 76 PRC, but it was a guaranteed services system in a country that had very little in terms of productive forces. So I think the idea now is to bring that social system to parity with that era of China, with the kind of modernized, fully developed productive forces, so that you can guarantee everybody really, really high quality healthcare. The big innovation was the barefoot doctor in that era, and now it unimaginably improved the welfare of the people. There's a reason why life expectancy went up as much as it did. But we're talking about modern facilities, modern methods, these advanced things that people enjoy in the advanced capitalist economies, a welfare state that is slowly being eroded, but on the level of those countries in a socialist country, so that those guarantees do not go away. And that's going to be the test. If we start seeing income inequality narrowing, if we start seeing these measures going up and up and up, and quality of life continuing to improve, then Xi's ambition will have been met and it will have been successful. If we don't see that, well, I can't predict the future, but then again, I don't know what might happen. But
yeah.
But here's the other thing. I don't think that Xi would have set these goals if he didn't think it was possible to meet them, right? Because you can talk a big game, or you can talk a moderately big game and meet those goals instead. But what he's done has made these very high-reaching objectives with the confidence that it will happen. And I think that says a lot. And I think that says a lot to his confidence, the party's confidence, the people's confidence. Everybody, I mean, I know we're running short on time, but that is another thing I will say about my time here. People are so optimistic. People are so excited about the future, because even in the city centers where change isn't as big in the past few decades as it has been in the rural areas, people are still looking forward to what's next. They still believe. They still can look around and see new things all the time. There's new subway lines being built. There's new train systems. There's new whatever. The skies are clear, as we talked about, and I think that's why Xi and the party have set these goals, because they believe that with the trajectory they're on, that it will continue. And I don't have any personal reason, and there's nothing I've seen here to give me reason to doubt that, truly and honestly.
Yeah, really, really good to hear, and a lot to think about there. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. We have been talking with Ian Goodrum, who's an editor with China Daily and a member of the Communist Party USA, about the situation in China and the history and the legacy of Marx on his 200th birthday. This has been another great episode of People's Republic. Stay tuned for more wonderful community radio wherever you happen to be listening. 91.7 FM in Austin area and 102.3 FM in New Orleans.